Concerns over a potential widespread nuclear confrontation are mounting as North Korea appears adamant about its nuclear ambitions and Russia adopts an aggressive nuclear attitude. So what are the chances of a nuclear strike against South Korea as warned by North Korea? Is the risk of a nuclear war at its highest as asserted by US President Joe Biden? And how can the global community seek to ease these rampant tensions? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee for today's session on nuclear alarm across the globe. Amid Pyongyang's ambitions and Russia's aggression, I have Professor Kim Young-jun at the Korea National Defense University. Professor Kim, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
I also have Mr. Dan Smith at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute live on the line. Mr. Smith, it's a pleasure.
Likewise.
Professor Kim, we'll begin with you then. North Korea began this work week with a fresh threat against South Korea, claiming that its recent missile test launches were designed to simulate a nuclear strike against South Korea. First then, Professor Kim, what are the prospects of an actual nuclear strike on this part of the Korean peninsula?
Yes, the situation is not good at all. As you said, we need to prepare all scenarios, especially the worst scenario of especially tactical nuclear use, because the expression of tactical nukes means this is not just negotiation tip, but more focused on military purpose. North Korea will develop its nuclear tactical nuclear weapons with the short and middle range missile, and that will be against the U.S. military bases in South Korea, Japan, Guam, and Okinawa, rather than U.S. continent with the ICBM. So it is more military purpose at this stage, and not a bargain chip for negotiating table over the years.
Right, and beyond the Korean peninsula, Mr. Smith, there in the West, now US President Joe Biden has said that the nuclear war risk is at its highest since the Cuban Missile Crisis. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think it is very difficult to calculate a risk in a way that allows you to quantify and compare it. But I think that most people would agree approximately, at least, with what President Biden said, that this is the moment of the greatest danger that there might be a nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago. Having said that, that still doesn't mean that nuclear war is probable. I think it is, perhaps one could say, more possible than it was before the invasion of Ukraine, but not a probable event. It would be extremely irrational for President Putin to order the use of nuclear weapons, even on a small scale. And it's not really clear what it would bring him. It would not necessarily bring success on the battlefield, and it would certainly bring him a great deal of condemnation among governments and states around the world whose support he has been desperately trying to win. So although I see the argument that as the Russian invasion of Ukraine gets more and more bogged down, as it seems to have been doing in recent weeks, as Ukrainian successes against Russia increase, the argument that in those circumstances, President Putin might opt out of desperation for a nuclear strike. I still don't think that that is the probable course of action, because it is a deeply irrational course of action.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Kim, Monday's report by North Korea's state-run media reportedly broke 6 months of silence about its nuclear tests. Now, previously, North Korea's testings were frequently followed by immediate media reports regarding the success of those launches. How do you explain this shift in strategy?
Yeah, North Korean media mentioning nuclear in public is a very important strategy, communication strategy. We need to prepare more serious against the threat of North Korea. On opening talks on the tactical nuclear weapons in public, target definitely domestic audience and as well as the international audience. For domestic purpose, increasing tension among people will decrease discontent against its regime, like economic difficulty and COVID-19 situation. For international audience, the new Cold War situation allows North Korea to develop its nuclear and missile without sanction of without the cooperation of China and Russia. So this is a very important strategy, communication strategy of the North Korean regime.
Right. And Mr. Smith, going back to tensions in the West, now pundits believe that the conventional wisdom is that the US will not respond in kind, even to a possible nuclear attack. Do you share this view? And if that is the case, what response do you forecast should Russia opt to use a nuclear weapon?
Yes, so, I mean, you're inviting me, as pundits are being invited, to look into a quite murky future, something unprecedented almost, and see what might happen. And of course, it is very difficult to forecast. It's very difficult to be predicting. So the first thing is that I think that the USA obviously makes a big distinction between a nuclear attack on Ukraine, as awful as that is, and a nuclear attack on the USA. So I think that if there were a nuclear attack on the USA, there is really very little doubt in anybody's mind that the US would strike back with nuclear forces. Will it do the same, or would it do the same if Russia were to use battlefield nuclear weapons, for example, against Ukraine? And I think that there are strong reasons for thinking that it might not, and some evidence that it might not. There have been war games in the Pentagon in which, in this kind of circumstance that we're talking about, Russian attack on a third country, in this case Ukraine, the USA and its allies have got such extraordinarily powerful conventional forces that they could really destroy an awful lot of Russian armed forces very, very quickly without resorting to nuclear weapons at all. So I think that we may be in a situation where, in fact, the question of would they make a nuclear response, do they risk looking weak if they don't? It's the wrong question to be asking and the wrong way to be thinking. What would be the effective military response that the US and its Western allies could make against Russia? As I've said, they have enormous military power. They could destroy a lot of Russian armed forces really quite quickly. What would be the international reaction? Surely, if the US and the West were to respond in kind with nuclear weapons, there would be a lot of international opinion which would think, well, the two sides are just as bad as each other. But if one side holds off from using nuclear weapons and is also effective, then I would presume that the adverse international reaction doesn't happen. So all of this, if you can follow the calculations and the balances and the estimation all the way through, means the nuclear option is not necessary for the West to take up, even if Russia uses nuclear weapons. There are other better options for it.
Right, I see. And Professor Kim, North Korea, for its part, has also reiterated its alleged right to possess nuclear weapons. And that being said, what options does the international community have to perhaps better encouraging Pyongyang to surrender its nuclear ambitions then?
Yeah, now it's very, very difficult situation for North Korea to denuclearize its nuclear weapons by negotiation table, whatever, by itself. Because clearly Kim Jong-un experienced already a failure of denuclearization deal with former President Trump in Hanoi, and also the Russian-Ukraine war made North Korea not to join the any kind of negotiation deal for denuclearization because he learned a lesson from the Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons, and also as well as the Libyan case. So at this stage, North Korea spent a lot of money and energy to develop its nuclear and missile, and also he put the constitution for the right of the nuclear use. So it is not easy to make them to join denuclearization meeting. But anyway, we must not give up our effort on this with the international community, not just by sanction, but also making nuclear situation decreasing. So the international community have to be together in opening up any kind of dialogue with North Korea, and we need to make nuclear situation better situation with the China and Russian side.
Right, of course. And Mr. Smith, have there been any states that have surrendered their nuclear weapons, perhaps after acquiring them?
There are a few cases, yes. And of course, one of those cases is Ukraine, which, like Belarus and Kazakhstan, were as states coming out of the Soviet Union, the USSR, when it broke up. They had nuclear weapons and they gave them up. It was the only responsible thing to do because they didn't have the infrastructure, the wherewithal to be able to manage, control, look after their nuclear weapons. I think there would have been great worries about maybe terrorists being able to get hold of those weapons. So it was completely the right thing to do. But those three states had the possibility, theoretically at least, to say, OK, we're nuclear states now, we stay on this path, and they decided not to. In addition, you've got the case of South Africa, which had a well-advanced nuclear weapons development program, and which abandoned it when apartheid ended in 1994. And you also have the case of Libya, which had also a reasonably well-developed nuclear weapons development program and gave it up by agreement with the West in the early 2000s. And lastly, of course, the case of Iran, which had a nuclear technology development path, which could have led it towards nuclear weapons, although it is actually speculation as to whether that was the ambition. By agreement with the Iran nuclear deal, they closed that path off, and it stayed closed until President Trump said, OK, the US no longer supports this deal. And they haven't been able to, under Biden and the new Iranian presidency, they haven't been able to get back to reconstruct that Iran nuclear deal. So the short answer to your question is yes, there have been such cases, but they're not actually cases, I have to say, that are completely parallel to North Korea, where a state has developed nuclear weapons, has tested them, is testing the weapons systems to carry them, and then decides to give up. So were North Korea to denuclearize itself at any point in the future by agreement, that would be an unprecedented and major achievement.
Right, and staying with North Korea, Professor Kim, quite a number of pundits here in the country believe that North Korea is close to conducting its seventh nuclear test in the near future and may perhaps choose to return to the dialogue table after it. What do you foresee?
In the past, when North Korea conducted their nuclear weapon test, it will be for North Korea to lead a better negotiation bargain chip. But at this stage, to develop their technical nuclear weapons for military purpose is not the same as in the past behavior for the better negotiation table, but it's more like the focus on their military capability against the South Korea and Japan and U.S. military base in the region. So negotiation is not easy right after the 7 nuclear weapon tests for North Korea to join the negotiation table. For a while, a strong reaction of the international community will not allow any dialogue with North Korea after the 7 nuclear weapon tests. Of course, South Korean government will consider other defense capability, just like in NATO nuclear sharing style or reintroduction of tactical nuclear weapons. So we already had several discussions over the months. So, but anyway, we never give up our effort to for the negotiation with the at the same time strong defense capability. So I think it's the termination of the Russian-Ukraine war. It will be first step to develop our negotiation possibility with North Korea. At the same time, U.S.-China relationship is also very important factor for North Korea to join any kind of dialogue. And finally, maybe 2024, we may have a better situation after the U.S. presidential election, whether we don't know about the Trump re-election possibility. But anyway, 2024 is one of the most important factors in shaping another new geography for North Korea to join the negotiation table.
Right, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this discussion. Thank you very much, Professor Kim, for your time and your thoughts. And Mr. Smith, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.